All right.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for another very special edition of WOWSA Live. And we are here, well, I'm here in Southern California. Uh, Ryan is over back in South Africa. And how are you today?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. The end of my day, the beginning of yours, but I had a good
Yes,
one.
yes. And how is it in South Africa with lockdown and everything?
It's still very, very prevalent here. We're on what we call lockdown level 3. Now, so things are starting to open up a little bit, but
Uh-huh.
still all the swimming pools are closed and we're not really allowed on the beaches. You're allowed to go and exercise, but you can't sit around and chat to a mate. And,
Oh, okay.
but slowly business is opening up as well. But when I say slowly, that's the operative word, sadly.
Yeah. And for people who aren't aware of your career, can you just touch upon all the channel swims, marathon swims, ice swims, adventure swims, everything
Do
that
you
you've
really
done?
mean all?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
with pleasure, Stephen. Yeah, I'm a open water. I call myself an extreme open water and ice swimmer.
Got it.
I don't really have a lane to use a silly pun. I do
Uh,
extreme adventure swimming. I've done some of the big channels. I plan to do some more down the line. I've done extreme ice swimming, and probably everything in between.
yeah.
I suppose, you start in South Africa. Our water's quite cold here. We've got a local swim called the Robben Island.
Yeah.
It's where Nelson Mandela spent 18 of his 27 years incarcerated. And it's become quite well known as a very difficult swim. It's not far at all. It's about 7.5 kilometers.
Uh-huh.
But that water is cold, and it's become a fantastic training ground for me. So that's where my career started. It used to be the Everest to get a Robben Island, and I achieved that back in 2003. And that set me on this amazing journey. All the way, obviously, I don't want to call it the next step. There's lots in between, but I found myself in the middle of the English Channel not too long after that in 2008 and succeeded in my English Channel. I've done the Gibraltar Straits twice. I enjoyed it so much. What else have I done? Many other swims. I'm not going to name them, but then I started to become more fascinated with the element of cold and its massive impact on body and more so the mind. And it became a personal journey for me to see how far I could push in the different levels of cold, obviously getting colder and colder. And that has taken me around the world and earned me some really good Russian and Siberian mates who are crazy guys, but I love them. And I found myself in places like Tumin, Siberia, in minus 33 degrees Celsius, and in Murmansk. And I've found myself with a bunch of them trying to swim from the USA to Russia across the Bering Sea, with a group of South African mates trying to swim around the southernmost tip of South America, Cape Horn in the Sailors' Graveyard. We wanted to be first to do that, as well as the Beagle Channel and the Magellan Straits, and lots and lots in between.
Of all of those that you've done, what have been the most risky? The one that you had to think about, okay, how do we achieve this swim but don't kill ourselves? Because I mean,
Yeah,
that's at the level of where you guys are swimming.
yeah. Very much so, Stephen. And I think I've actually got quite a long list of those, believe it or not. But I think, one of the beauties of what I have done and with a group of mates is we've never been sponsored to do these things, or not until recently anyway. So when we do go away, we're on the South African Rand. It doesn't stretch far outside of our borders or within them
Yeah,
for that matter. So, we always got to do everything on a shoestring budget, and
yeah,
we don't fly over to whatever challenge we're doing with it, with our support team with us and medical
right.
professionals. We got to wing it when we get there and make friends with the right people and cut through the language barriers, and put what we want to, what we need in place. And I think the one that first jumps out is when we try to do that around Cape Horn, the southernmost tip of South America swim. Just the reputation, my understanding is that if you're into sailing, that is kind of your Everest to sail around there. And we want
Yeah,
to do kind of find a little boat that would take us down there. Then we're going to jump off the boat and see if we could swim around the southernmost tip of that island. And I really can write a book about that journey. We eventually found an old sea dog who had a boat that was seaworthy enough to take us. We threw enough US dollars at him, and he took us all the way down to Cape Horn. One of the most epic and nerve-wracking trips of my life, because it wasn't calm waters. And you know, you then when D-Day comes and you finally pull out of the sort of Terra de Fuego, which is nice in between the islands, and you get into the open ocean, you got to do a little bit before you actually get to that final destination. And then you know, it's freezing cold and the water's a little bit wild, and you got to strip into your Speedo and jump off the boat. And because of language barriers and various other things, you know, you don't have the support that you used to. We had some wonderful people that we picked up along the way supporting us, and you know, you lay your best laid plans on the boat and how it's going to go down, but we got different swimming paces and all these things. And of course, we jump off the boat, and within the first 30 seconds to a minute, there are 5 swimmers that have dispersed in different directions, and you know, only 2 support boats, and you didn't see them again till the end. So you know, there's some stuff like that that we would probably plan differently. But that, I remember being out there in that ocean with no support boat. What felt like a long time was probably only a few minutes at a time, but you know, can feel like an eternity when you're in 8-degree water and you can't see anything. And yeah, that was a real challenge, and probably I learned a lot of lessons.
Yeah, that's extremely clever. How basically with a shoestring budget, you had to depend on yourselves and the local people who undoubtedly know the waters better than anybody else.
Correct.
That is very, very clever. And what about the Bering Strait swim? I mean, that was talk about a bunch of people. I mean, hundreds of people on the boat.
It was amazing. You know, I've got 2 Bering Strait stories, but the one you're referring to, I'm sure, Stephen, is when we were invited by the Russians and to attempt to do a relay swim from Russia across to, I think it's 84 Ks or something, as the crow flies, across to Alaska. And wow, just the logistics of that swim were absolutely insane. I can't even tell you the journey to get to the start of that swim is like, that's a book all on its own. And then you start with a swim, we jump on this ship called the Irtish, which is an old Russian medical ship. So it's definitely not built for comfort. And our understanding was that we'd be on that ship for about 3 or 4 days to do this continuous relay. And you know, that's what we told our families back home. And I think 13 days later, we eventually got off that boat. And you know, the water started at 2 degrees Celsius on the Russian side. And that Bering Strait lived up to its reputation. You know, it was wild, wild, wild. And you're on these zodiacs, and you know, there's a whole structure on how you got to swim. It was 10-minute slots at a time. Yeah. And you know, you think you're brave until you're out there, and it's 3 a.m. in the morning. It's absolutely pitch dark. You can't see anything. That you know that your support crews are really battling to hold their vessels steady and keep direction. And you've got to strip off as many clothes that you've got in the back of this Zodiac and jump into 2-degree water. I tell you, it took some bravery, but there were a lot of us out there, and you know, it took a lot longer than it was meant to. But I think 12 days later, if memory serves, we finally made it into climbed out in American soil.
How many legs that you personally did during that stretch?
Sure, I don't recall totally, but you know, we started with about 100 swimmers, Stephen. If I remember correctly, at the end it was down to about 20 to 27.
Oh, really?
It's a little bit sketchy because we hit some currents that we just could not get through. That's why it took so long. You know, we all knew there would be currents, but the veracity of them was just something unbelievable. And a lot of the swimmers who are very, very brave and capable and amazing swimmers who've done amazing things, but they just didn't have the pace to break through. So there's only a handful of us who were deemed a little bit faster and you know, who could actually fight the current. And even then we had to work out different tacking systems. You couldn't just swim. You had to, you know, there was a whole kind of technical GPS scenario that we had to come up with. But we're literally held at bay about 30 Ks off the coast of America.
Wow. And your second Bering Strait story?
Well, while I was on that Bering Strait swim, you go past these two little islands called the
Yeah.
Diomede Islands. I don't know if
Yeah.
you know them, but
Yeah.
they've fascinated me, and I've only ever read about them in the past. And now I'm on this ship, trying to do this relay swim, and we literally go right in under the shadow of these two little islands. And they're 3.8 kilometers apart. One of them lives in Russian water called Ratmanova Island, or Big Diomede, and the other one, 3.8 kilometers, is in American water.
Uh-huh.
And the international date line runs between them, or timeline, whatever. So,
Yeah.
the one island's technically 23 hours away from the other. So it's quite a fascinating swim. And I started to really fantasize about swimming solo from Russia to the USA, or USA to Russia. And Lynn Cox had achieved this back in the 80s, and no
Yeah.
male had ever attempted it or gotten it
Yeah.
right. So I set my sights on that. But to go from Cape Town, South Africa, to access that is near impossible. But luck had it. I teamed up with a bunch called the Mad Swimmers, a guy called John Craven. I don't know if you've come across them.
Yeah.
Fantastic group, and they were trying to swim between all continents. They're not worried about the cold. They've got wetsuits and they do their thing.
Yeah.
And it's all for a brilliant cause to raise money. And they got a hold of me to say, you're the guy with the experience, actually swam in those waters.
Yeah.
You can come with us. And I said, oh, absolutely, I'll help you all the way. But I am going to be in my Speedo, and I'm going to be trying to make it between. I had to fly, Stephen, just for reference. I flew Cape Town to Johannesburg, Johannesburg to London, London to New York, New York to Anchorage, Anchorage to Nome, Nome to Prince of Wales, and then I got on a boat out to the island. So it's,
Wow.
it's that's the thing that adventures are made of. And I also want to say that I rate that as one of my biggest failures. I never got it right. And again, I'm going to say this quite a lot through this interview. I can feel it now. I can write a book about it, because I really can. The things that we had put in place, the amount of planning and time and energy and expense. And when you get there, everything is different, and you've got to change everything. And one of the most important things I needed to change was upstairs. And I lost my nerve a little bit. So I still did the swim. But because the Russian island is actually a military base, and Russia had denied us permission to come into their waters, unfortunately that didn't stop us, but we had to be quick about it. So we were based in the American side, and we had to quickly zoot across to the Russian waters, drop us off, and swim across. And the pinion was just too heavily loaded that if I accessed the Russian island illegally, the chances of getting arrested or being in big troubles were huge. And then we also lost quite a lot of our support crew, because the American company we had hired, who had been fantastic up to that point, refused to go across the border because they lose their permits and insurances and things like that. So they would only go halfway. And now suddenly you're in, and the water was meant to be 6 degrees and it was measured at 3.2 Celsius. You'll have to do the conversions for me into Fahrenheit. But it was amazing. So eventually I jumped in and swam 3.8 kilometers between the islands, but I did not access the Big Diomede Island, and I pulled out just short of the American island because we got our vectors all wrong. It was a mess in the end for me, but that's where you learn the most. And wowza, I learned a lot there.
Yeah. Well, you learned a lot, but you also have this very strong base of the Robben Island swim. And recently you set a world record. You did your century swim, 108. Is it 108 or 109?
Yes. So 109 was the record. The previous record was held by a gentleman called Theodore Yach, who is a good friend of mine who passed away recently. And he set it at 108, which was way above anything I felt I could achieve. But I've chipped away. And then last 17th of June, I managed to push over his 108 and respectfully took it to 109.
Yeah. Now you started in 2003, so this was essentially a 17-year journey.
Correct. Yeah, and Stephen, certainly not a goal from the outset. It's I never didn't factor. Doing one Robben Island crossing for me when I started in 2003. I think that's also another interesting part that people are always fascinated about my journey. They hear what I've done. Then they realize I only started when I was 30 years old, or 29, 30, somewhere around there. I mean, I'm 46 now. So, it's part of the message that I like to give. If if you didn't start as a kid, you can still do stuff,
Right.
find your own vice or your own journey, but get off that couch. So yeah, I did my first one, which was, absolute Everest and reserved for those superhumans out there, those athletes, certainly not for me. And yet I did it. And that started my journey of going, well, you know what, I really didn't think that was possible for me. And yet now I've done it. So where to next? And then I started setting the bigger swims, like the English Channel came into my horizon. And one of the best training grounds, I would argue, in the world is right here between Robben Island and the beach. So I started doing that quite a few times, because it's got that cold water, it's got the wind and the waves and the fog and the sea life and the things that sting you, and everything that can go wrong out there. So you get a lot of water time and mental training. And then slowly, my numbers started racking up. Before I knew it, I was celebrating number 50.
Yeah.
And so it went. And then last year I got my 100th.
Yeah.
And now, I got number 108, which equaled the record just before lockdown. Then we were shut off for 10, 11 weeks.
Yeah.
I made my comeback in 17.
Yeah. And what's remarkable is out of 109 crossings attempts, you've succeeded 109 times. You
Correct,
are 100% success rate.
I am with a caveat, because this was just my own little measure, in that not once did I pull out or get pulled out because I was too cold or too tired or couldn't make it. On 3 occasions, I was pulled out for safety reasons against my desire. So there are 3 times that I started and didn't finish, but they weren't of my own desire. Once, believe it or not, was not what most people think. It's sharks chasing out the water. It was actually 2 seals. And I mean, we have seals with us most of our swims, and these 2 little teenage seals were getting very, very boisterous and aggressive and started nipping at my toes.
Really?
Yeah, it was quite terrible. Eventually I got pulled out. And the other time was, it was before we didn't have a GPS on the boat, and this thick mist rolled in. Couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I didn't know it. I was face down. But the boat crew very rightly pulled me out quickly while they still had some visual on the beach and took us in. And then there was one other occasion. But you're quite right. So 109, I consider it a clean slate in terms of the measure that I put in place.
Right.
But I do need to caveat those 3 occasions.
Yeah. And what has been the longest swim that you've taken to do that in terms of hours?
Oh, the longest. Well, yeah. So it's quite funny, and this is again where you learn the most about yourself. There's the island sits out in the bay, and you can decide you can swim to a place called 3 Anchor Bay, which is about an 11-kilometer route, or you can choose a shorter route to the beach. And I decided I wanted to do this longer route my first time, and very, very few people had ever made it in a sub 3-hour swim.
Okay.
And I decided that for my first attempt, I was going to be the guy who made the sub 3-hour. And there's quite a well-known mythical current called Cutler's Current. A guy called Barry Cutler, late Barry Cutler, was also a friend of mine long before I knew him, took on the swim, and he's not a very fast swimmer, and he did it in something like 2 hours and 40 minutes, and he found this remarkable current that's never normally there. So I got Barry himself to be my support crew that day.
Wow.
And I set absolutely everything up perfectly, and I got in, and the swim took me 5 hours and 24 minutes. And it was freezing, and it was horrible, and I found the reverse side of Cutler's Current.
Yeah.
But I was still a novice swimmer back in those days, and I think what amazed me was, don't ever expect anything. Don't be arrogant. The ocean's going to tell you how it's going to go. But also just how you set your mind to a sub 3-hour, how hard it is to do a 5-hour. Now, if I'd set my mind for a 6-hour swim, I would have walked out going, there we go. But because I only thought I was going to do 3 hours, those extra 2.5 were brutal in that cold water. It just gets inside, and everything is just tense, and you start to doubt everything about yourself. So again, in my early days, I learned that lesson properly.
Yeah. And Barry was on your escort boat, was he, or was he on?
Barry was, yeah.
Was he laughing? Was he apologetic? What was his reaction to this?
I think a mixture of, not that he had anything to be embarrassed about, but the idea was that he found this fast current for me and put me in it. No, I think he was very generally concerned, because we were going sort of directly for the end point. Eventually, he had to take me out to sea
Oh, okay.
and, do a big kind of dog leg to get me in. So I
Oh,
swam, instead of 11 kilometers, I probably swam about 16 or 17 that day. The water I remember was 14 degrees Celsius, which is not
okay.
toasty warm. And we totally overshot the end point. So I actually came
Oh,
out. The only other person who's ever done the route that I ended up swimming that day is Lewis Pugh. So
okay.
and so him and I often have a laugh that we were both going for what we call a 3 anchor bay swim, and we both got a Robben Island to Rocklands by mistake.
Yeah. Well, you've certainly surrounded yourself with some famous individuals. I mean, Lewis, Theodore, Ram, and and your group. I mean, you
Yeah.
are in some kind of company there. I mean, you have to do what you do to keep up with those guys.
Absolutely. And the other guy that I'm spending more and more time with, because he got locked down here in Cape Town, except we've been hiking, not swimming, is Cameron Bellamy.
Oh, okay.
He-
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, and he's a fascinating gentleman to hang around, and we go for these long hikes up on the mountain, and you can imagine the stories that come out. So
Yeah.
I enjoy the company that I've got, and that's I think well, I don't think I know that a lot of what I have achieved has been because of the company I have kept, and doors that have been opened by individuals who know how to open doors. And I've followed and learned a lot, and since taken on my own career and taken it forward.
Yeah. Are this group of people, cameramen included, are they the exception to typical South African men, or are all South African, every South African man I know is an amazing extreme athlete? Is it a small group, or is like everybody in South Africa just tough as can be?
That's well. Listen, clearly it's not everybody. The circles that I mix in, there are a lot of tough
Yeah.
women and
Yeah.
men.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the swimming world for sure. And you know what? I would love to unpack that more, because I think if you've spent any time in South Africa, or you know anything about what we deal with on a day-to-day basis here, it's a beautiful country. It's fantastic, and I hope everybody comes to visit and come and swim with me. Um, but there are psychological issues that very few other people do
Okay.
have to deal with. Um, that's just in life in general. Then you take our swimming, and if you live on the coast and you spend a lot of time in the oceans, our waters are known for those great whites. This is where
Yeah.
they breed. This is where this is a hub.
Yeah.
So you've got that psychology, and eventually you're either not going to swim, or you're going to get over that, or you're going to process that. Plus, our water, ocean water, is extremely cold over here. When I say extremely, not like Arctic. It ranges between sort of 9 degrees Celsius up until 18 on a good day.
Yeah.
So, usually playing in what we term cold water. And I think when you put all those elements together, and just the good old South African psyche, it's set us a little bit apart
Yeah.
from many.
Yeah.
I think, I don't want to sound arrogant. We're not better than anybody. We just sometimes do things a little different.
Oh, I'll say it. You're better than everybody. Your whole group. I mean, amazing group, men and women, and uh, so you now are sharing a message. I mean, you've got, like you said, you have lots of books to write, and I do
I
hope
do.
at some point you sit down and you doc on all this, because I mean it
Yeah.
is inspirational. But what are some of the
Thank you.
messages that you're sharing nowadays?
Mm. I'm sharing quite a few, and I'm really enjoying it, because the more I share, the more I realize what I've learned and what I'm able to teach people. And I've been very lucky to put together an incredible story, because I'm a very real case. I never started to do any of the swimming stuff and this cold stuff and pushing different boundaries. I did it for personal reasons, because I became fascinated with how useless I used to be, and how I honestly believed that everything that I used to read about people swimming and athletes were for other people, not for me. Um, and just how much I am capable of. So I really was an old couch potato, loving the remote control and getting fat on the couch. And just through luck and talking to a gentleman called Grant Fraser and Tony Salmayer, they both deserve a lot of credit in my life. They got me off the couch just by talking, and I joined a little swimming squad.
Uh-huh.
Gary Freeling, I'm still with him today, sort of 17 odd years later. and my journey started. So anyway, that's the first message. But my most important message, Stephen, is I've learned through the element of cold just how unbelievably powerful the human mind is. I think we all know that the human mind is this gateway to absolute greatness. But through swimming and the element of cold, I've realized that this gateway to greatness is designed to keep us safe. It's designed to keep us inside our comfort zone. And why did the element of cold teach me that? Simply because we haven't evolved well as a species to handle the cold, but I think we've evolved very well to avoid it. So when we do strip into our speedos and we jump in cold water, your body and more importantly, your mind goes into overdrive to convince you. Defense mechanisms kick in because it knows that the only two outcomes here, either your core temperature is going to warm up the ocean or the ocean is going to cool your core temperature down. And that's more likely scenario. So that highly evolved defense mechanism says, get out right now. It is way overzealous, and if it's really cold water, you're denied the benefit of rational thought. So everything goes into, you get that pain, that panic, that fear, that hyperventilation, and all you can think of is get out, get out, get out. Now, through repeated exposure to the cold, I've realized just how overzealous this is, and how, yes, there is an endpoint, but where your mind tells you the endpoint is a long way from where it is. There's a lot of margin on the other side, and that's where the magic happens. And I started to practice that in the cold. So, as soon as you get cold, I used to say, right, the second I got to that point where I couldn't carry on, I would tell myself, your swim has just started, right here.
Wow.
All that other stuff, that was the fun. Now this is your first minute, and you're not going to pull out in your first minute. And so on and so on. I'd have these little mental games. And then I started to realize, but hang on, everywhere in life, this is what happens. As soon as you are confronted with something you don't know the outcome to, if you try that thing that you don't know, there's a chance you're going to fail. And when you fail, that hurts. There's a little bit of emotional pain, there's embarrassment, there's whatever comes with that. So we default to not try. And we default to this comfort zone. So I've got a very nice message all built in all the adventures I've done around the world that I think really does get people to look at the little impossibles that shape them and keep them inside this horrible comfort zone that everybody's in, and they can deliver nice steady performance, maybe get that paycheck, but you're going to underachieve in many other areas. So I challenge everyone just to find something that they don't think they can do and work their way, figure it out, and give it a go. If you fail, I promise you, you've learned something.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. When you speak, who responds well to you? Is it adults your age? Is it older people? Is it the young kids? Who really comes and goes, God, that was great?
I'm blessed to say, and this isn't sales talk, I promise, but everybody, I talk from junior schools to high schools to universities, right up to the biggest corporates. I was recently now in Dallas on a stage with 800 people in the cyber resilience, Mimecast cyber resilience conference. I speak the other day to a group of presidents, company presidents. So you've got this whole room filled with people who have achieved absolute top, all in their sort of late 50s, 60s. They're at the top of their game in business, and they're all hanging on every word that I say, and everyone wants to have a word with me. It's fascinating, because they're 10 times better at what they do than I'll ever be. But there's just something missing if they haven't done the kind of stuff that I've done. You can't learn it without doing the kind of stuff that many of us and myself have managed to do. So the short answer is it appeals to everybody. And that's after 7 years of delivering keynotes to every kind of audience you can imagine. I say that with great confidence.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, can I give you one anecdote?
Yeah, yes, please.
I get so much of similar feedback for obvious reason, but the other day a lady came to me after my talk and said, you know what? And she was quite pregnant, could see that. And she said, I've got my cesarean booked, but I really want to give natural birth, but I'm too scared. After your talk, I'm canceling the cesarean and I'm going to give natural birth.
Wow.
And after that, I was like, wow, I mean, that's weird. And then afterwards, she called me up probably about a month later, 2 months later, whatever it was, and just gave me a feedback that she had the natural birth and she owes it all to me, and it was the best experience ever. So I just loved that one, because it was nothing to do with business or better sales figures and targets and all the stuff that I get a lot. It was real.
Yeah. How does self-doubt? I mean, you mentioned, okay, when you get really cold, okay, this is where the race starts, or this is where my challenge begins. But there
Yeah.
has to be some element of self-doubt at some point. I mean, and how do you overcome that? What's that trigger that allows you to go, okay, one more stroke, one more minute?
Sure. I think everyone will have a different answer for that. But I think, and I think every swimmer is going to have a different trick. And I think tricks play a large role.
Okay.
And let's call them tricks for lack of a better word. And just a piece that I'm busy writing now. So it's fresh on my mind. Every time I do this Robben Island swim that we've spoken a lot about, it's only call it 7.5 kilometers. But every single time that I've done it, I get cold, the cold gets in your core, and I start to look for reasons why I can get out. Sometimes I pray for a shark to come, just, so the support crew can see it and they'll pull me out. It wasn't my fault, it was, the cold makes you negative. It makes you look for, it's a defense mechanism, rather quit than go forward. But every single time I've done that swim, I've got to the end, or like at least 2/3 of the way in, and now I'm starting to look, where's that beach? Because I'm done. I'm finished. All I want to do is put my foot on the sand. And it seems like eternity. The beach never comes. And every time I walk out, I'm like, geez, that was long and hard. However, more recently, I've started doing double Robben Island. So I'll swim there and back.
Oh.
And so that's a 15-kilometer swim. And I usually do that, when I'm training for something a bit bigger. And then I tell myself, it's a fascinating thing for me. It's just a mind calibration. So I tell myself, these are my little tricks, that I'm not allowed one negative thought on the outward journey. And I'm only allowed to start saying swear words under the water when I'm halfway back, so 3/4 of the way. And I'll tell you, Stephen, the first leg goes like, boop.
Really?
Whereas if I was only doing one leg, I'd be moaning like a stuffed pig. You know what I'm trying to say? So it's a calibration. So you ask, like, where's that self-doubt? I now study the swim I'm going to do. I look at the time it should take me to do it, and then I calibrate my mind to go a lot further. And that sets me in good stead. So if it's a 2-hour swim, I say you're not allowed to moan or a negative thought or anything for 2.5 hours. And on thereafter, you can moan like a stuffed pig, because that kind of gives me, it's almost like a treat, it's like a chocolate, I allow myself negative thoughts.
Yeah.
So that's almost my Pavlovian little silly methods. But you know what? I'm also not. There is an end point, and I have plenty failures, under my belt as well. I've learned a lot of lessons the hard way, so I'm not arrogant about it. And I'm certainly not one of those inspirational speakers, because now I stand on these stages doing this stuff, who says, that anything you put your mind to is possible. Yes, of course, you need a positive mind, but in my genre, in ice swimming, there is an end point.
Yeah.
It's just not where your mind tells you it is, and that's what you need to know. And take that away into life, and just know that where you believe your limit is not your limit. I promise you can do a little bit better. Just step out of that comfort zone and try. And that's where people amaze themselves, and where I've amazed myself.
Wow. Very powerful. And if people want to listen to you, they want to learn more about you, where do they go? What's you have a website?
Yeah, Ryan Stramrood, funny spelling of my surname. So it's Ryan, and then Stramrood is STRAMROOD. Do a Google on that, and you'll find me. Hopefully we optimize enough, and you'll find my website. But I'm all over Facebook as well.
Okay.
I suppose we all feel famous on our own Facebook pages, but that's all I've got.
This has been a wonderful time spending with you, and the depth of what you're offering the rest of our community is great. And I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. And Stephen, for everything that you do. Thank you so much. Really is fantastic. And, I was just watching one of your videos the other day with the Ocean Sevens guys, Linton Morrison and Cam Bellamy and Antonio. And what I picked up from that interview, whether that's my goal or not, just listening to the anecdotes that those gents spoke about, it helps someone like me.
Yeah.
So thanks to you.
All right. Thank you. Bye.